Hello everyone, welcome to the sixth, I've kind of lost track now, but I think maybe 5 or 6 episode of the Mind Games podcast.
The next episode of the Mind Games podcast. Welcome everybody to the Mind Games podcast.
We'll stop numbering them now. We'll just say welcome to the latest episode of the Mind Games podcast, where each episode we piece together a puzzle that is mental health with a bit of stuff in between. So this is real talk from 2 very real people. I am, of course, Thomas Welburn, the chronic health warrior and then multimedia extraordinaire. Obviously, joining me on this inner path of discovery is my co-presenter, the master of positivity, the Starsky to my hutch, Chris Allen, occupational health advisor, mental health first aid instructor, and all-round great guy. How's it going, Chris?
It's going really well, thank you. I like that. I like the Starsky and Hutch remake.
Yeah, it's okay.
I went through a period of time with my mates when we would be like, do it. It's just so memeable, I suppose. But yeah, other than that, I'm doing fantastic. Had a little holiday with the family, came back. I actually engaged in some very light and gentle Brazilian jiu-jitsu for the first time in a very long time yesterday with a friend. And I feel great.
Wow.
I feel great.
Explains why you seem so full of energy today.
Yeah, I think it does. But I've also started walking every morning. Since I got back from holiday and I was doing a lot of walking, I just thought, let's keep this ball rolling. So I'm tending to wake up earlier these days and now I'm just walking. I'd like to keep it going. So maybe that's the energy thing too. But yeah, I'm feeling it today, Tom. I'm feeling it today.
I can feel the master of positivity is definitely positive today. There's some vibes. There's some definite vibes coming.
Yeah, in full effect.
So, I won't go over the format. If you watch, you know the format. But we do have 3 sections. That's all I'll say from now on. But obviously, for the discussion, we got 2 things that we're going to cover today. We obviously have to talk about Naomi Osaka coming back because I think that's an interesting thing. And then, of course, we've got some stuff on ME, which is a chronic condition. Quite an interesting bit of news that came out. This is more UK based, so if you are international audience, you may not know how our system works, but I'm sure that we're going to fill you in on it. So we've got that. We've got a interesting question for the Q&A, and we've got a nice section of the In Clinic, which, again, no spoilers. Chris is going to fill us in on that. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the discussion and get this episode going.
Discussion.
Okay, guys, we are here back in the discussion part of the podcast, and we're going to start with the Naomi Osaka news, which is that she's back, and she did her first tournament, I think. I don't know if she placed very well. I don't think she did. And she did a press conference, which was quite upsetting, I guess, because she did get upset during that. She actually left for a brief period. She did come back to finish the questions, though, but there was a particular question that seemed to rub her the wrong way.
What was that question, Tom?
I'm trying to find the full question now, because I think if you actually see the full question, it kind of maybe changes your viewpoint on this a little bit. So I think I've found it, because a lot of news outlets have been kind of presenting this story without actually quoting the full question. And when I found the full question, it kind of made me my view went a little more balanced, should we say. So the reporter asked about her relationship with the media. And he said, and I quote, "You are not crazy about dealing with us, especially in this format. Yet you have a lot of outside interests that are served by having a media platform. I guess my question is, how do you balance the two?" I don't necessarily think that is an inappropriate question. He certainly phrased it in a way where I think he was trying not to cause unnecessary offense to her, given her past and how she doesn't like press conferences, and she's made it clear. But obviously the press have a certain vested interest as well to ask questions and get certain answers out of her. And obviously, she left that last press conference. And obviously, the press probably want to find out more about why she did it. And I think in my opinion, it was quite a balanced question. And she couldn't seem to answer it properly. And then she left. And I don't know what your view on this is, Chris, but I was kind of the opinion at the end of it that you do have to do these press conferences sometimes. It is part and parcel of the job. And I do feel sorry for her, and I do understand the situation that she's in and how she struggles with these things. But there was a lot of vitriol on the internet saying maybe that this question was out of order, that it shouldn't have been asked. But I don't necessarily think that the tone of it was anything inappropriate. I mean, what do you think?
Well, what I think is that question is, to a certain extent, calling the elephant in the room out, isn't it? So, I mean, this happens a lot in MMA press conferences, but Dana White and some of the fighters are a little bit more brusque and deal with these sort of things in a different way. They're the press conferences that I watch more regularly than tennis ones. I don't think I've ever watched a tennis press conference unless it involved Naomi Osaka and us discussing it. So having said that, I do think that in certain circumstances, calling the elephant in the room out is a really good thing to do because it stops people dancing around topics. But in this context, everyone already knows what the elephant in the room is. Naomi struggles with press conferences. She struggles seemingly with having eyes upon her and the performance being not necessarily tennis sort of performance. Yeah. So this actual sport performance, she can perform that. She's a multiple time world champion. She can do that with the eyes of the world on her. But when she is required to engage brain in a different way, and she is required to answer questions and be involved with the press and do all of that sort of stuff, it's problematic. So from one hand, I don't think it needs to be vitriolic. I just think it needs to be further evidence that this is not an effective way for Naomi to communicate with the outside world. Obviously, she's had some bad experiences with this, so that might be reigniting. I'd hesitate to use the word trauma, but possibly she might have sensed some sort of emotional injury in her past. How could we possibly know? But it seems that question, to me, I agree with you, was not particularly weaponized. It was, how do you balance? So the question was, wasn't it, you don't really like doing this, but how do you balance the obligations that you have towards sponsors and your fans with actually squaring, not doing it or doing it with yourself? And the fact that she turned up to do the thing is progress in itself, but then being perhaps put on the spot and asked to discuss. I mean, that question's exploring a little bit why do you feel this way? And as a professional, how do you square it?
It's a fair question as well. In that she does have a platform that obviously serves her and has definitely benefited to her career. And I think what he's trying to say that it's not to pick and choose how you put yourself out there is maybe not necessarily fair. However, we do know with her history that she struggles with things like this. So obviously you've got to take that into account. But then the conversation carries on because she did answer back after the question. She asked for clarification before noting, I can't really help that there are some things that I tweet or some things that I say that kind of create a lot of news articles or things like that. I'm not really sure how to balance the two. I am figuring that out at the same time as you are. So I think there's a certain sense of ownership of this as well. She's aware of it and she's acknowledging that what he says is correct. So I don't know. There was a strange amount of media coverage from this that was negative on the reporter for asking that question. But in my opinion, it seemed on the day like it was quite fair. They had a discussion. I think it upset her just because it was probably too close to heart, and it was a question that it's probably still very raw what happened when she walked out of that press conference, and she needed time away. So I think maybe that was what upset her at the time. And the fact that she came back afterwards to finish the press conference, to me, shows that that question didn't cause anything untoward that forced her to have to take a break again.
Yeah, I think I would agree. She gathered the strength to, return to the press conference and answer the question. Perhaps she needed some time away from the spotlight to compose herself in order to give such a well thought out and honest sounding answer.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely difficult for her, given that she struggles with stuff like this. Obviously, we always have to remember that and take that into account. But something I said to you, Chris, while we were chatting at one point was, when you're a professional athlete or you're someone in the public spotlight, things like this are kind of part and parcel of the job. It is difficult to pick and choose. So for some people, and this is totally coming from a mental health viewpoint as well, for some people who are in that field, if they can't handle it for whatever reason, be it mental or something else, when is the time to say to yourself, maybe this isn't the career for me or the field that I should be in?
I would say it's probably to do with impact. If adjustments can't be made to that arrangement, so for example, if Naomi's career cannot progress without either her overcoming the issue with the media questions and the press conferences, that's the word I'm looking for, the press conferences. If she cannot overcome that, and that continues to be a necessary part of the role, then perhaps that's the time. And we also have to, on the flip side as well, look at the individual. So what's the impact? What's the impact on the person? So what is the impact on Naomi? How deleterious, to use the same phrase again, how deleterious or negative or on their mental health?
Yeah.
On her mental health, is it likely to be in the long term? Would, support, counseling, media training, would all of these things help overcome?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with all of that. So you're basically saying that she should explore the support available to her first. If that doesn't work, then what are your options? I mean, is reconsidering your career path probably it's probably the final thing, right?
Yeah. So looking internally about what you can do to overcome the problem, if anything, then looking at what adjustments can be made for you in the short, medium, long term, what, work needs are required. So if press conferences are off the table, how likely and reasonable is that as an adjustment to work for Naomi going forward? Would it be possible for it, maybe instead of press conferences, it's a sit-down interview, like movie stars do, where they sit down with one person and they have like that, rather than, in front of a Comic-Con audience, like a Marvel Comic-Con audience. How about like a press junket where she talks to an individual person, she knows the questions she's about to be asked. Adjustments like that could potentially be put out there.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually.
If that's completely off the table, thank you. But if that's completely off the table, then arguably, yeah, it's a decision's going to be made either by her or for her by, the tennis, the tennis tournament organizers, to include her or not include her. And it's, that's what I mean by decision needs to be made by her or it will be made for her.
Yeah.
I do always try and encourage people, to paint their own life with a brush and do not hand it over to anybody else to paint for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I don't think that there's much more to say on that, is there? It's a very difficult situation. It's a sad situation for her. And it's, again, there's no real solution to it. It's something that she's going to have to either grow as a person in that respect and get more used to this, or there's
coping strategies,
or there's going to have to be adjustments made so that she can cope with these sort of things better, because it's obviously going to play on her mental health long term if this carries on. So there's not much more that can be said on that. And we hope that it improves. So on the second topic, we're going to move on to the second one now. And this one is more towards chronic health, but still with a mental health spin. I think you'll agree, Chris. So for the international audiences out there, we've got the NHS, National Health Service. They are completely publicly funded by the UK government. We pay tax for the National Health Service. So it's something that I think everyone in this country loves. And then we have a accrediting body called NICE, which kind of sit next to the NHS, and they deal with the medications and the treatment, and they basically advise the NHS on what treatment to give to people depending on the condition they've got, and things like that, and medications, and so they deal with all of that sort of stuff. So an interesting article came out in the UK about ME, which is obviously quite a debilitating chronic condition. Some people can get it and it's not that bad. Some people can get it and they're basically bedbound. And there's only really two main treatment options for this. And I think it was you who told me that, Chris. I wasn't actually aware. I thought there was more, but it is really only cognitive behavioral therapy and graded exercise therapy. So they're the two main treatments that you would normally get prescribed if you were diagnosed with ME. So there's actually an internal battle going on between the charities and NICE at the moment as we speak, because NICE are actually advocating that we keep CBT and graded exercise therapy, whereas the charities are advocating the opposite. They're saying that we need to drop them because there's a lot of people that either say they don't work, or in the case of graded exercise therapy. And I thought this was a pretty strong statement. Some of the charities have said that people have wrote into the charities to compare graded exercise therapy to psychological torture. I don't know what you would say to that, Chris, but I thought this was a really interesting story. There's probably loads to cover that we're probably not going to have time to go over, but I was just wondering what your opinion was on all this, Chris.
Well, I think it's interesting that possibly effective treatments want to be taken off the table by anybody. But I guess the purpose of taking it off the table is because it's not effective, no? So this internal argument is going along the way. And what is it based on would be my question. Is it based on opinion or is it based on fact?
I think that's the problem. You've basically got science clashing with personal opinion. So you've got the charities who have obviously got people writing in with their personal opinions and kind of thoughts on the process because they've experienced it individually. But then you've got NICE who are obviously going on studies and science. And I think there's a definite clash between both of those opinions.
Yeah, and I consider that the condition itself is poorly understood and difficult to manage. And people, in my experience with it, I haven't lived with it myself, but I've had many clients and some friends who have lived with this condition. And in my experience, it's one of the ones that people tend to find a way through themselves. It's often, from my perceptions, that people have gone through the medical system and exhausted all possible avenues. And then they'll happen upon a treatment. They'll happen upon a way of managing for themselves. Now, graded exercise therapy, as far as I'm concerned, has benefited some of my clients, but not others. Antidepressants have benefited some of my clients with depression, but not others. Counseling has benefited some of my clients with depression. And so the reason I bring depression into the equation is because it's a nice illustrator of, treatment A works for client A, but not for client B. So let's try a different treatment.
Yeah.
And there would be, I guess, no reason why these potential treatments or existing treatments could not be still included in the guidance, but just maybe slightly amended. I don't know. Yeah, very, very interesting point of view. And it's like, there is a bit of a struggle going on within the nice guidance and with the charities and the organizations that are feeding into it. I do find the turn of phrase quite alarming, that it's like, what was the turn of phrase? It's like psychological
torture. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when it gets to the point where someone is perceiving that, then maybe it's time to take your foot off the gas with regard to that particular treatment. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it plays into what you said a lot, which is just about individualized approaches to this sort of stuff, and not just putting it's never just bullet points, is it? You need to think of the individual and tailor the treatment to them, because with these sorts of conditions especially, everyone feels them differently, don't they? And certain things that might work for one person don't necessarily work for another. So it's very hard to... I actually, in a way, feel sorry for NICE having to write guidance for things like this, because it's probably incredibly hard to put together a list of suggestions that a lot of GPs are going to go out and just use it as a bullet point list, because again, like you've said, it doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah. And I guess herein lies the benefit of having a lot of time to spend with clients and seeing them more than once and seeing them over again and say, okay, so that, treatment pathway A didn't work. Let's try B and or C and see where we go with it. But very, very interesting topic to open up, I think. We could talk all day about this, couldn't we?
We could. We definitely could. I mean, like I say, I've experienced it myself, so it's a difficult one. And that's why I don't think it's fair to put blame on any side, because it's just a difficult one. Because obviously you need to have some sort of guidance for people. They can't just go into it blind. But at the same time, you need to tailor it to the individual and listen to their needs as well. So, I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot of things. Just before we conclude and go into the Q&A, I'd probably just finish it off by saying one of the things that NICE have said, and this goes back to what you said, Chris, is that one of the reasons they're apprehensive about taking them off the recommended treatment list is because once you take CBT and graded exercise off the available treatments, you're not really left with anything. So you don't really have anything to tell GPs or specialists or anyone what to do with someone with ME. So if you've got no guidance, I guess that presents another problem of, well, what do we do to treat this individual?
Exactly.
So it's
headache.
It's a headache. But that's the best way to conclude it, isn't it? I think
so.
Yeah. But very, very interesting story, and one that we definitely wanted to comment on. And yeah, we hope that they kind of come to some sort of an agreement soon. I mean, just before we finish then, what do you think would be the best approach? And I suppose that's a hard question for you to answer.
No, it's really easy. A holistic, person-centered approach that is less tick boxy and way more consultative, if that is a word. I don't know if I just quite have made a new word there, but relies on consultation with the individual.
Yeah.
And I am sure there's plenty of specialists in the medical field who are taking this approach. But the arguments that are going on are in the ivory towers way above them. Be interesting. Yeah, interesting to know what they've got to say on the matter, I suppose. Yeah, but you know what? If you are a therapist or a treatment specialist for this condition, then we'd love to hear from you on the podcast. Like, do write into us and let us know what your point of view about this debate is, because I would love to know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If anyone suffers from ME or is in the field of coming up with or deciding on the medications for it, that would be a very, very interesting person to have on, or just to send us a question or a comment on would be amazing, I think.
Yeah, that'd be cool. If you're out there, get in touch.
Yeah. So I think that pretty much wraps up the discussion. We've gone through two pretty interesting and big topics, I think. And now we're going to go on to the Q&A, where we've got quite an interesting question this week, haven't we, Chris? Quite a long one as well. So we will go over there now, and we'll see you in a second.
Q&A.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're now in the Q&A section, and Chris is going to read out today's question. Quite a long one, but very, very relevant. And I am sure that everyone at some point in their lives has had to deal with this, or has dealt with it, or is even dealing with it now.
Yes,
so,
it's a good one. It's a good one. Thank you, Tom. So here goes. I feel let down by one of my closest friends. I'm 45 and I've been great friends with this person for 20 or so years. They moved abroad about 3 years ago, and we have become increasingly more distant. When we do talk, they aren't as enthusiastic as they used to be. I recently had a baby, and they didn't seem to show any sort of interest or care about this massive life event of mine. They were the first person I could think of to be my baby's godparent, but I'm so disappointed in their reaction when I asked them that I actually regret it completely. I feel like a distant acquaintance to this person who has been my best mate for so long. My partner thinks that maybe we both just moved on, but my friend was so important to me that we shared so many good times. Recently, they've started putting me down regularly and seem to have a chip on their shoulder about the progress my life has made, while they've effectively stood still for the last decade or so. I don't really know what to do, and I'm hoping that your advice can steer me. It is affecting my mental health. I feel anxious about communicating with them, and I don't really understand why that is. What do you suggest I do?
Wow.
Yeah.
Very detailed.
Lots to
so
unpack.
many things to unpack. Yeah. I guess the first thing I would say is that I probably imagine that this sort of stuff is more common than he thinks.
Oh, yeah, I think so. It's especially painful, though, isn't it, when it's someone that you still value very highly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose that's the first thing to say. It happens. Acquaintances come in and out of our life. But when it's someone that you've considered to be a close friend for like long enough that when you have a child, you value the relationship with that person so highly that you may actually make them a godparent.
Yeah.
It becomes fairly tricky when you get a nonchalant shoulder shrug back in response. Now, this person might be going through a difficult time themselves. We don't know. We can't possibly conclude much from the question there in and of itself, but pretty difficult to receive, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly easy to take from this, given that he was going to make that person godparent for his kid, that they're very close friends, if not probably best friends.
And what's the place of a godparent? The place of a godparent traditionally
is to look after the child if something happens to you.
I know. You're entrusting your child to this other person. If you're flesh and blood, right? The most prized thing that you have in the whole world, that your complete, as far as I'm concerned, my complete regard goes to them.
Mm.
And so if I nominate a godparent, and I have only nominated one for both of them because I know I could rely on them no matter what, beyond family, they're the closest thing to it, closest thing to blood. So that's the first thing. And so we can empathize and understand with the person's experience, can't we? That must be pretty devastating to kind of essentially get a metaphorical shoulder shrug in return, right?
I'm trying to think, but because like you say, there's so much in this question that it's very detailed. But
you know what comes to mind for me?
Go on.
What comes to mind is a really sort of proverb or metaphor, and I do like metaphors. I think I talk often in metaphors because I do think it's like the operating system of the subconscious. It enables me to transmit to you some ideas and some principles wrapped up in a story so that you can understand them a little easier than if I was explaining them. So what it made me think of when I was first reading it, and because I've been going back into physical clinic on a more regular basis lately, it made me think about a tube train. And that's what I was thinking about. And you know, when you're on a tube train and it's populated with other people, if you think about your life as a tube train, you're kind of sitting on a tube train and you're there with your parents and you think that they're going to be there all the time. But, you know, other people come onto the tube train and they sit in the carriage with you. And sometimes they're there for a really long time. And other times, you know, they get off. Sometimes they're by your side and they're a big part of the journey because they're with you from almost the start to almost the end, but then, you know, they get off and you miss those people sometimes and there's a vacuum left by those. Yeah. Some are, you know, you never get over the lack of that person on your carriage. It might be a parent, it might be someone that you love, but they were there for a good amount of time and then they stepped off. Other people, they get on and they're there for a really good time and it like lifts the spirit of the carriage for a while and then they get off again. And this is what it made me think of, really. It made me think about
I'll just say as well, because that's a good metaphor. At the end of the trip, you get off yourself.
Absolutely, and that's your journey, and that's been your whole journey. And some people are with you for that time, and they help you build these sort of beautiful memories that I have a sense that you're kind of referring to in the question. But no one can be there for the entirety of your life, and so I think your partner's observations about this particular scenario that you find yourself in are very astute. Maybe you've moved on and maybe that person's gotten off your train carriage and you can't pull people back onto your train carriage. Unfortunately, that's what free will entails. They step off. We don't know how long people are going to be on our train carriage for, and they will get off, whether we like to admit it or not. Yeah. That's what comes to my mind. Because I was kind of pondering this on the other day on the way into clinic. I was on the train and it's an interesting point of view, I suppose. Though
I was thinking because obviously his friend moved abroad, and then they weren't in touch for a while. I think is what the question said, and they've been in touch kind of sporadically since. I wonder if from his friend's perspective anyway, because obviously if they live in different countries, it's probably going to be harder for them to stay in touch and kind of maintain that connection. So I'm wondering if from his friend's perspective, maybe his life hasn't gone the way that he was hoping and he's not happy in his own life. So he's kind of taking it out on his friend because his friend is happy and he's got a child and sounds like things are going quite well for the person who sent in the question. Maybe on the opposite end of the pond, his friend is hearing all this and, you know, he moved abroad for a better life and it's not actually worked out. So he's kind of just taking it out on him.
Yeah, I think your perceptions, I agree with those. I think that most definitely seems to be what's going on, but we don't really know what the dynamic has been. Maybe it's been like a piss-take dynamic the whole time, but then now that there's an additional layer of sensitivity in the equation, maybe, you know, the affront is unwarranted. We can't possibly say, but it certainly appears that way with the question. I wonder if the question asker who emailed in would like to follow up with some additional information. I don't know. But it sounds like it's a really difficult time. So, I mean, what can we say with regard to this other than perspective change, which is essentially what the metaphor's about, isn't it? The train carriage, people getting on and off and just, you know, accepting the fact that, your partner's entered your life. Now there's a new life, a new baby that's entered your life as well. And someone else has gotten off. And as sad as that is, it's a natural part of life that things move in cycles and change, and people come in and they go out and they're with us for certain periods of time. And then, then they're not. And maybe those times were really good and we grasp hold of those times and we hold them up in a sort of a rose-tinted perspective, but they're not the right person for right now.
Yeah,
maybe.
Some things change, some things end. It's not really, and it's not even anyone's fault. Sometimes it can be no one's fault. It can just be, like you say, somebody just getting off the train. But I would say in this instance, as you said, it is indicative of something more, I think, on the friend's side going on that maybe he's not happy about in his own life. That's what it sounds like to me. But
yeah, the chip on the shoulder's the giveaway there, isn't it, really?
But I guess I would also say that the fact that this is all coming to light now and the friend is kind of acting in this way, sometimes stuff like that can show people's true colors. So I would wonder if maybe it could be looked at in a beneficial light, in that maybe this person actually wasn't as, and I don't like saying this because it's quite a statement, but maybe this person wasn't as good of a friend as he thought, and now these things are coming to light in the whole context of this, showing kind of the bad characteristics.
So I think in terms of advice, beyond the perspective change, I would suggest spending more time with those people that do value the friendship. Having a new child is daunting, but what I found is the social circle that my wife and I had when we had children boomed. It just spread out hugely. More difficult in COVID times, but the reason for that is because my wife was going to more sort of baby classes and going to, then you start getting invited to children's birthday parties where you meet parents, and then the school equation comes in and you start to make, forge new friendships with, children's parents who are in the same year group as you. And some of those people get on your carriage and they stay for a little while longer than just the birthday party and just the school year. And, it really, boom, opens up your social circle in a radical way. So spending time, making new friends, spending time with, the people that do value your friendship and your time is, I think, the single piece of advice that I would give, in addition to the perspective change thing, alter your point of view, alter your outlook on this whole scenario, and then spend time with people that nourish you rather than delete you, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any more that I would add to that. Obviously we're looking at this we have to look at this from the perspective that this is over, right? And it's not, it's obvious that the friendship's like dead and buried. It doesn't sound like it's repairable. So we have to look at it from the perspective of what can the guy do to move past it. And I would just say that I think it plays into what you said, which is just kind of self-healing and just looking after yourself. And like you say, been forming friendships with the people closest to you, around you, outside of that, and just use it. I would just use it as a path for personal development and just learning more about yourself and who your true friends are and things like that.
Yeah. My personal ethos when it comes to this sort of thing is everyone must be respectful. I don't care who you are. You must be respectful, or you're not in the circle, or you're not in my circle. And so if you're getting put down by someone who calls himself your friend, build barriers, set expectations. And if those are overstepped on a regular basis, then there's a decision there that needs to be made, and that's an individual decision that you and I, Tom, could never possibly instruct someone to make. It goes back to the thing I was talking about earlier on. You paint the picture of your own life. Don't hand a brush to anybody else. So there's our advice, So the advice is perspective change. The advice is also sort of self-care and in through the prism of meeting people that do love and care about you and don't put you down. And second of all, perhaps if it may not be over, it may be salvageable, but you might just need to impress upon the individual some expectations and boundaries if you're going to continue to be friends.
And don't overthink, I think, is the last point I would say. Don't overthink, simply because sometimes it just is. And that's it. That's it, full stop. It just is. There doesn't need to be any thought into it. As if you overthink things like that, it can just drive you crazy. And there's no real reason to waste energy in a thought process like that when you can just carry on that train, as you said in that metaphor. So I think we've answered that. Would you say we have?
Oh, I think so. I think so. Between us, we've done a good job of answering that question.
Yeah, and if you're listening, I guess we'd be interested to hear how it pans out. Whether you manage to sort out the indifferences with your friend, because it does sound like you were like best friends and something happened, or whether it's inconsolable and you decide to carry on that train, basically. But we wish you all the best. Thanks for the question. Who was it from? Did you give the initials?
No, I didn't, but let's give the initials. It's RA.
Okay, thank you for that question, RA. And yeah, we hope you managed to take our advice on board. And as always, if you do watch, let us know. Let us know if it helped. So on that note, I think we're going to go into the last bit, aren't we? Which is the in clinic. And again, no spoilers. Going to let Chris fire this one out and tell us what it is, because this was his idea. He came up with this section for this episode. So it was something that tickled him particularly. So we'll see you over there in a second.
In clinic.
Thanks very much for the handover, Tom. Now, what sparked my initial interest in this is because we got a question from someone with the initial V a couple episodes ago, really early on actually, about quitting toxic workplaces. And so the information that came through to me was essentially a whole bunch of questions to ask yourself before you quit. Because what we're finding with the reopening of workplaces and all the businesses and organizations that have been very happy for you to be working from home for the past while now want you all back in. And it's been termed the Great Resignation or the turnover tsunami. And I just love those terms, the Great Resignation. And it seems like people are having a shift in priorities. Now, so the questions that I'm about to run through shouldn't take too long. There are 17. But it shouldn't take too long. And they're not...
It shouldn't take too long. There's only 17.
No, yeah. There's only 436. But it doesn't necessarily equate directly to a toxic workplace. Some of it might be principle-based. Some of it might not. But we'll get through them. So the first question, and I'm sure this is very natural for most of you to ask yourself at some point when you're considering leaving the place, is, should I even consider staying? How, to use the term of the day, if you like, how deleterious is this workplace to my mental health, my physical health, something that is going to affect my life experience? How important is it that I actually get out of here? And that could be a really good question to ask yourself, to just reaffirm your intentions that you need to get out. The second one is how. How do I get out? What is the process of leaving? What is the next step? How do you go about gather all this information, get all your soldiers in a line? How do you go about submitting your resignation? How long do you have to hang around for? Once you've got all this sort of information, it can feel much less daunting to actually execute in your exit plan, if you like. Why did you take this job? All of those sort of things, the motivations that made you want to come in the first place. The next one is, how long have I been feeling this way? how long have I been feeling this way? Is it a couple of weeks, or has it been since you landed pretty much? These sort of things are really important questions to ask yourself. There is a reason why you've been feeling this way, and how long have you been dissatisfied with your life experience within this job?
Yeah.
Is there any change that could take place? You took the job for a reason. Did it meet your expectations? Has there been a radical change? So the next one is, what do I actually want to do? And this is something that I personally have struggled with often throughout my life. Do I really want to be doing the job that I'm doing? And to a certain extent, I've molded around the job, and the job has molded around me. So is it possible that you could look at it from a different perspective? What do you actually want to do? I know a lot of people change careers, and a lot of times that happens. I've got a friend who has changed career very recently and seems to be, taking to it very well indeed. So it's a huge life change to switch careers. Do you want to stay within the same industry? Do you effectively want to do the same job that you're doing now, but just with a different manager or a different organization? That's a really, really strong question to ask yourself about how you get what you want out of your life.
Okay. I'm just going to jump in really quick.
Go,
because it sounds like, and I didn't know this about you actually. So it sounds like that when you first went into your job, it sounds like that you weren't convinced. You say it molded around you. So was it not, let's say it wasn't love at first sight with your job?
Yeah. I began a pathway. It was perhaps a pathway that was not thoroughly thought out. I went for it. I followed a certain path, and I took some deviations along the way in order to find what plays to my skills strongest, I think. Yeah. And when I'm talking about job, it's not just job, it's career, really. I wanted to be an artist.
Well, I think we all did at some point, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fancied that as well. It didn't work.
Yeah. And so, there's still parts of my job that I would love to let go of course. I think everybody lives with that. There's bits and pieces that we would love to just let go of and focus on the stuff that we're really good at. That's the dream. That's the idea. So considering what would be right for you, what would you actually like to do? What do you really want to do is to summarize that question, really. The next one is along the lines of what would your perfect day look like? So do you actually value the commute into an office, or do you value working from home? These are the sort of things that need to come up, and they are coming up today. Thinking about what your ideal tomorrow would be. So, for example, do you listen to podcasts, maybe journal or meditate, or just have time to yourself on the tube on the way in, or on the drive on the way in? Are you listening to music? And that's your only opportunity in the day to really be able to do that and get some headspace away from the house or the office, or however it is. I've been talking to people all the way through the pandemic who are telling me, can't wait to get back in the office, I'm struggling at home. And I've been hearing from people on the opposite side as well. Oh my God, we've got to go back to the office. I don't know what that's going to look like. And fear has arisen, and I really don't want to. So there's that. What does your perfect day look like, and how much is a new job going to provide you with that? The next one is what your friends and family say. And of course, that's important for people. It might be more so important when you have family and dependence upon you. When you're young and you have less responsibilities, that might be less important. So really, take that really as, it depends. It depends, doesn't it? How important that question's going to feature in the equation.
Remember, they can also be biased.
Of course, yeah, they could be biased. You're absolutely right. The next question, I suppose, is to do with what would it look like to quit? What would you be releasing? What would you be giving up if you quit? Would you be giving up friends? Would you be giving up access to a free gym? Would you be giving up a proportion of your salary to move to a different job? These sort of things come into the equation. And that's the term, the golden handcuffs, isn't it? Where people are paid very well for what they do in an organization, and they can't get a comparable wage anywhere else, and they end up staying. And there's lots of things to consider with regard to that. But also The flip side of the coin is, what do you gain? What do you gain? It probes a different proposition that might engage different elements of your sort of mental faculties. By thinking more positively about the problem that you've got ahead of you, or the job that you want to quit, will you be more valued? Will you be more valuable in the job market? So that's the question there. The next one is about the options that might exist within the employer. So have you had some sort of dialogue with the business or the organization that you work with? Would it be possible to transition into a different department? Could you follow a different developmental pathway within the workplace that you're in? It depends on the size of the organization, isn't it? If you're working for like a one-man band and there's like only,
it's probably more difficult.
Exactly. Yeah. If there's only like 5 of you in the office, it's going to be difficult. But if it's an employer of 8,500 people, then you may have more opportunity in which to play with this question.
Even then, though, there's lots of outside factors with that are maybe not in your control, such as, does the organization have openings for the field you want to go into? Are they even going to allow you to go on a personal development plan to get into that sector of the organization? So there's loads of stuff that you need to consider with that, because I've looked at stuff like myself in the past, and the opportunity is not always there, even in a massive organization.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of builds on the next question, builds on the previous ones, really. And it's the one that I encounter most often. And it's a nice, juicy one. Should I quit because of a toxic or bullying boss? I get that a lot. It depends, once again, doesn't it? What's the impact on one's life of the toxic boss? If the boss is toxic and they're in a position of power over you, I would say it's probably quite impactful. But I cannot possibly quantify that for anybody else, nor could I answer this question. This is a question to ask yourself. However, what options are available? Again, if it's like a 5-person office working for one person at the top of the tree who happens to be toxic, you can't get away from them. But again, if we go back to the 8,500 people organization on the other extreme end, is there another department that could be transferred over? Is there even a possibility of a change in reporting line? Is there another senior person within your department that you could report into instead? I've worked in places where the boss was so toxic, or perceived to be so toxic, that there would be a witness for every meeting from the department in the room with them, to make sure that everybody, not just the boss, but everybody was playing fair. So answering that question, being able to come up with a sense of a pragmatic, logical answer to that question will give you the capacity to be able to make a good decision in relation to that, I think.
Managers can definitely make or break someone as well at a company. If you have a really bad manager, it can destroy you. If you have a really good manager, it can make your job pretty nice. Yeah,
absolutely. The next question is, when should I quit over stress? And that's a huge one. And now, what is the source of the stress? Can the stress be managed? The health and safety executive are getting way more punitive about stress. So what is your place of work doing about the levels of stress you're experiencing? What are the triggers? We know from the health and safety executive that in workplaces, there's a number of key triggers, which I won't go into now, but could definitely form part of a discussion on another day. The main key triggers of what people perceive stress to be within their role, and this is specifically workplace focus. So that's a really good point of view to take. Should you quit over the stress? Well, let's go a layer deeper and see whether the stress can actually be managed with a few tweaks, or whether the stress is just overwhelming and it's just considered an inherent part of the role. I see that often too, and that's just rubbish, because it's a health and safety risk that requires management. Legal, financial responsibilities come into play as well as moral. So are your expectations realistic? So Is it realistic that I'll be able to quit my job today, right now, right here, and not even serve my notice and work effectively as an artist tomorrow and for the rest of my life, and keep everything that I have secure and safe, and all the people that depend on me accounted for? What are your expectations?
I like that. I like that one.
Yeah. What are your expectations? Now, you are an interesting cat, aren't you? Because you've gone and you've transitioned your career and you revolutionized yourself and you changed yourself. You moved your work and you upskilled, etc. And you went along with it. What's your point of view on here? Were your expectations realistic, or were they so out of proportion that they seemed insurmountable? But then what's the story?
I'm not going to go in. I don't know whether I would go into my job now, because for me, the jump from my other career, which was marketing, which I'll reserve comment on that field, but
got it.
Jumping from marketing to what I'm in now, which is video multimedia, which was, I guess, quite different. I wouldn't really say that I took a risk doing that.
Okay.
It was mainly just applying for those types of jobs and kind of believing in the skills that I already had, because a lot of the skills that the job that I got were asking for, I already had. I put a show reel together in my spare time, which I
still want to see that, by the way. I still want to see that show reel. I'd love to. Please, let me see it.
That was probably about the biggest risk that I took at that point.
Okay.
But I did that on weekends and things like that. I didn't do it while I was at work, because that's a risk. That, to me, that's quite a big risk, because you're crossing work with trying to do something else. And that's something that I do not advocate. I think it's very dangerous when you're doing work in the job that you've got to try and facilitate something else. It's so hustling's good, but, and yeah, you can fit things in your lunch break or stuff like that. And yes, it might overrun into your current job slightly. But if it gets to a point where your current job is just second fiddle to this thing that you're doing, and it's not even necessarily giving you any sort of positive gain, then that's a problem. So I think if you're going to take a risk and go for something that you really want, you still need to balance it out with, well, I still have to pay the bills. So, yeah, that sucks, because I think we'd all just like to run away and do whatever our dream is and just start earning money for it straight away and quit the job that we've got that we don't like. But you can't necessarily do that at the beginning. You do have to balance it out. So that's something that I would say. I think...
And that beautifully summarizes, actually, you've transitioned into the last question that I'll cover today. Is now the right time? Is now the right time to move? And I would hazard to say that right now, depending on the industry that you're in, it could be incredibly advantageous to move. There are some places that are offering bonuses to new people to join because they just can't get the people. But then, of course, the job market out there, if you quit without the safety net that you're describing, the job market out there can be incredibly daunting for a lot of people. So is now the right time is the last question to ask yourself. So hopefully there's some questions in there for people like V and anyone else who's considering leaving their work, because it seems to be an awful lot of people are quitting jobs at the moment because it no longer suits them to be commuting into the city, or, to be in a building 5 days a week that when they can, very effectively do their work from home. But that's been the section there. What was it? That's the in-clinic section, is it?
Yeah.
That's the in-clinic section, Tom. Thank you.
Tons of points by Chris.
Awful lot. If anybody wants us to elaborate on any of these elements, either from a personal or a professional or a subjective experience in terms of advice, do write in and let us know if you want us to open up any of those questions with a little bit more detail. That would be absolutely fine as well.
Look, I mean, I'll just summarize really quick before we sign off. But if you're thinking of quitting your job, as many of us probably are, as many people probably do, just have a plan. That's all I would say. Have a plan. Don't just do it on a whim, and think you're just going to walk into your dream career overnight. Doesn't happen. Some people get lucky, most don't. So have a plan. Think about how you're going to get there, and do it gradually. Like have a baby step, proper plan thought out of how you're going to get the skills, how you're going to get into the field, how you're going to build yourself up to the place that you want to be in that field. You need to granulize. Is that the word? But
could be. I don't know what the point is. Go on.
You need to get to the macro level, the tiny little points.
The granular detail. Yes, Tom.
Exactly.
Yes, the granular detail. I love it.
And don't just throw something out in your head and just think, right, I'm going to do this. You need to, if you've done that and you've got this dream in your head and you're like, right, this is what I want to do, then great. But then work backwards and think, okay, I've got this dream. How am I going to get there? Work right backwards to the point that you're at now, and then you can work forwards and follow that. That's what I would say.
Tremendous.
And I hope that helps someone who is thinking of leaving their job and wants to achieve something differently.
Start with an end in mind and plan the steps backwards. What more could you possibly suggest? Well done.
Yeah. So I think that's it, isn't it? I think we've reached the end. And we've actually done it in one recording session because usually it takes us two.
Can you imagine? It's almost like we're getting better at this, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is, isn't it? So we'd like to thank everyone for watching and or listening. If you're watching us through YouTube. If you're listening through one of the many podcast platforms. So that would be Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher. We're on quite a lot, and I kind of lose count. But we're on a lot. So thank you for continually kind of supporting us. We're on all the major social platforms. I should probably list them out. We've got Instagram, we've got LinkedIn, we've got Twitter. If you want to send us a question, please send us a question. We love questions. And you can send them to our inbox at askmindgamesuk@gmail.com. That's askmindgamesuk@gmail.com. We want questions, so please send us questions. You can also direct message us on our social media platforms at Ask Mind Games.
That's it.
And I think that's about it, isn't it, Chris? I'd like to once again thank the amazing master of positivity, Chris Allen, for being amazingly positive like he always is. You can tell he's just started doing jiu-jitsu again. And from me, the chronic health warrior, Thomas Walburn, I'm signing off for the day, and so is Chris, and we will be in touch on the next one.
Thank you. Goodbye.